Hi everyone, this is Suhan Wang from LIS 461, and today I would like to talk about something in data ethics that I think is genuinely fascinating and a little bit frustrating. You've probably heard about the algorithms can be biased, maybe a hiring tool that favors men over women, or a facial recognition system that works better on lighter skin. But here's the thing I didn't realize until I took this course. Even when the people building algorithms are trying their absolute best to be fair, they can still fail. Because fairness isn't one thing, it's actually a bunch of different things that often fight each other. So, over the next 8 minutes or so, I'll walk through two famous cases that we have learned during the class: the Compass algorithm in the US and the 8-level algorithm in the UK. By the end, you will understand two things. First, why there's no single correct definition of fairness, and second, what we can actually do about it. So, no prior data ethics knowledge needed. Let's jump in. Okay, first case Compass. It's an algorithm used in US courts to predict whether a defendant will reoffend. Judges look at the score to decide things like bail, sentencing, parole. And that sounds very sensible, right? They use data, reduce human bias. So, what could go wrong? Well, in 2016, the investigative journalists at ProPublica dug into it, and they found something very uncomfortable. To understand what they found, we need firstly to look at two quick definitions. Don't worry, they're very short. So first, calibration means if the algorithm says you're high risk, you actually are more likely to reoffend. The Compass algorithm actually did this pretty well, so far so good. And parity means the algorithm's error rates should be roughly the same across different racial groups. In other words, it shouldn't make more mistakes for black people than for white people, vice versa. These both sounds perfectly reasonable. So the problem, they cannot both be satisfied at the same time. Here's the data ProPublica uncovered. Look at the first row, the false positive rate. These are people who were predicted to reoffend but actually didn't. For white defendants, 23.5%. For black defendants, 44.9%. That's nearly double. Now, the second row, the false negative rate. These are people who did reoffend but were predicted not to. For white defendants, 47.7%, and for black defendants, only 28%. So, what's going on here? The algorithm made different kinds of mistakes depending on your race. Black defendants were much more likely to be falsely labeled as dangerous, and they were also more likely to be missed when they actually were dangerous. But that second part actually worked against them too, because it meant the system was less accurate overall for black defendants. So, is Compass fair? If you care about calibration, then yes. If you care more about parity, then no. Same algorithm, two fairness standards, and two opposite answers. Now let's go to the UK 2022 COVID hit. A-level exams, basically the UK version of the SET or college entrance exams, got cancelled. So the government did what any reasonable government would do. They built an algorithm to estimate students' grades. The algorithm looked at two things: how your school had performed in the past years, and how you did on your mock exams. That sounds pretty reasonable, right? Well, when the results came out, nearly 40% of students, about 280,000 kids, got downgraded. And guess who got hit hardest? Students from lower income areas in struggling schools. Meanwhile, the algorithm quietly favors students from private schools in wealthy areas. Here's how the New York Times put it. Students and their parents, particularly those from lower income areas with struggling schools, were outraged that their futures had been turned over to lines of code that favor students from private schools in wealthy areas. Government officials said the algorithm was more fair because it prevented teachers from inflating grades. And students said our futures were handed over to a line of code. Same pattern, different country, the government chose calibration, making grades consistent across schools. Students wanted independence. Your grades should reflect you, not your school's reputation. And the students from under-resourced schools, they paid the price. So what do these two cases have in common? Nobody was trying to be evil. The Compass developers weren't sitting around and going, let's meet with the black defendants. The UK government wasn't saying, let's ruin poor kids' futures. They were generally pursuing what they thought was fair. But here's the catch. The fairness standard they chose protected some people and hurt others. Data ethicists Debacle and Klein call this privilege hazard. Here's the definition. When system designers from dominant groups do not experience the harms, they rarely anticipate these needs or account for them in the design process. In other words, the people who build algorithms are almost never the ones who get screwed by them. Now, if this trade-off is technically unsolvable, are we just stuck? Let's talk about solutions. We can't satisfy all fairness definitions at once. That's math. But we can improve how decisions get made. This is called procedural justice. Remember the ACM Code of Ethics from class? It's not a math problem. It's a thinking framework. When principles conflict, it tells us to do three things. First, public disclosure. Tell people, here's what fairness standard we chose and why. And yes, we know this might hurt some groups. Just be honest, upfront, and no surprises. Second, identify affected groups. Ask before the algorithm launches, who's going to be hurt by this, not after. Third, provide an appeal process. Give people a real way to challenge the decision. Something that actually works. You might be thinking, does this actually change anything if the outcome stays the same? Yes, it changes a lot. Because one of the most important things I learned in this course is this. Being seen is itself a form of justice. When people understand why a decision was made, when they know someone acknowledged they might get hurt, and when they have a real right to speak up, even if the final number doesn't change, their anger and sense of injustice just drops, and their dignity has been recognized. Second solution, external auditing. We can't design perfect algorithms from day one. That's unrealistic. But we can require that once they're running, they get regularly checked by independent third-party experts. What does auditing do? Three things. Transparency. How the algorithm works is open to inspection. Accountability. Someone is reasonable for the outcomes. And evidence. Victims have data to back up their claims. And it creates an accountability loop. Power becomes visible, errors become traceable, and victims have something to point to. This actually happened in real life. In 2021, New York City passed the first algorithmic accountability bill in the US. It requires all AI systems used by city agencies to undergo bias audits, and the results must be made public. If an algorithm starts discriminating against a particular group, it gets caught early, not just after a media firestorm. Auditing does not make algorithms perfect, but it makes sure someone is watching. Alright, let's wrap this up. Today we covered 3 things. 1. Fairness is not one thing. It's a set of competing standards, and you can't satisfy all of them at once. That's a structural trade-off. 2. We can't solve this technically, but we can fix the process. Procedural justice, disclosure tries, identify who gets hurt, give people a real appeal, and make them sing. 3. We need external auditing, independent oversight to hold power accountable. If you want to dig deeper and see more information, I have put my references on the last slide, and some of them are from our reading, so you can open them in our Canvas files. And then for the rest of them, I put links into it so you can just click it and see more information. Thanks for watching.